Joan by Carol M Mottershead, Chapter 22. Arthur called round to see Nicholas a few weeks later, and was invited to eat with us. He had heard from Nicholas that I had been feeling a little down of late, and had found something that he felt might cheer me up. An extract from the memoirs of an old friend of his that he thought I might like to read. The extract was from a published letter by Charles Dickens to his friend Mary Tyler, telling her about a puppet show he'd seen, and he believed it might be one of mine. In my opinion, the street punch is one of those extravagant reliefs from the realities of life which would lose its hold upon the people if it were made moral and instructive. I regard it as quite harmless in its influence, and as an outrageous joke which no one in existence would think of regarding as an incentive to any kind of action, or as a model for any kind of conduct. I had never met Charles, so I didn't know if he'd actually seen one of my shows. But it was good of Arthur to believe it so. It was fine praise indeed, coming from such a fine gentleman, a legend in his own times. After enjoying a pleasant meal that Nicholas himself cooked for us, Arthur confided in me that he had been rather concerned about me since his last visit. He told me that he had asked Nicholas about my welfare, but that Nicholas was reluctant to tell him anything, which was the real reason for his visit. He had become aware that Nicholas was often upset about something happening at home, but that he wouldn't talk about it, and after experiencing Punchnella's behaviour first-hand, he wanted only to offer his help. I had only once before spoken in confidence with anyone, and I wouldn't want to put that burden onto anyone else, so I thanked him for his kind offer and reassured him I was fine. I wasn't prepared to talk to anyone about my personal business, no matter how nice they appeared to be, especially after reading the letter in the puzzle box from John D. so recently. We continued to talk well into late evening about his writings, as he was a very interesting man with stories of his own. It was whilst he was explaining how he came to write about Sherlock Holmes that I was able to learn about the sort of symptoms drug users experience, and I recognised those displayed by Punchinella. It was like this man, Arthur, knew what I was going through already, without my breathing a word to him. Although reluctant to talk to Arthur at the beginning of the evening, after hearing all he knew about drug-taking, I decided to confide in him. Despite the message I tried to give out with my puppet shows, it was only the second time in my own life that I had dared to speak out about things that happened between Punchinella and myself. I'd always believed that a wife does not talk about husband and wife things outside the privacy of the home, for that is exactly where it belongs, in the home. After unburdening everything to Arthur, I felt such relief, yet at the same time guilty, as if I had betrayed Punchinella. Opening up to him had had a similar cathartic effect as talking to my puppets. All that covert hostility and anger seemed to fall away. It may only be for a short while, but for the first time in a long time, I actually felt like I was looking forward to seeing Punchinella again. Unfortunately, the emotional release I felt from confiding in Arthur was not to last for long. Punchinella had been away for days, weeks in fact, when Ralph, the new bottler, called in on his way home later that night to warn me that the troupe were on their way home. An hour or so passed when Punchinella arrived home, slamming the door behind him. Everyone else had stopped off for a drink in the village. "This damn economy," he yelled. "Increased taxes, they're crippling the working man. That's for those who can find work. These damn machines, too, are taking work away from ordinary people. How are we supposed to feed our families, I ask you? Punchinello sat down heavily in the chair near the fireplace, with only the dim embers still burning to warm himself by. He'd been drinking, too. I was all too aware that our street performances relied on donations from the public for our livelihood, and the economy being what it was, I'd anticipated his foul mood. But I had hoped he would at least come straight home and not just pour what little money he had earned down his throat. Punchinello had little or nothing left to contribute to our household income. He was feeling useless and downhearted, hopelessly depressed, and the alcohol just made him worse. I had felt good when I first heard Punchinello would soon be home. I'd missed him. Talking with Arthur had made me realise how much I'd missed him. Or was that only my guilt talking? I wasn't sure. I busied myself putting a supper together for him. He'd fallen into a deep sleep before it was ready. "I'll have that if it's going spare," said Nicholas. Bread and cheese was all I had, but he was welcome to it. The bread was already going hard, as was the cheese. There would be very little use of it if left till the morning. I handed it to Nicholas, put a blanket over Punchinello's shoulders, and went to bed. I tossed and turned restlessly all that night, anticipating the bad mood from Punchinello the next morning. All that emotional outpouring with Arthur, the dashing of my anticipated excitement at the thought of seeing Punchinello again. I awoke feeling physically and mentally exhausted. Once again, my loneliness was highlighted upon Punchinello's return. Punchinello needed help from someone, but who could I turn to? Who could I call? Who could I trust? Next morning, Punchinello refused to get up. "What's the point?" he responded when I tried calling him. "I've cooked your favourite breakfast, a full English, just the way you like. Eggs, bacon, black pudding, and fresh sausages." I tried coaxing him. He refused, turned over in the bed and pulled all the covers over him. Leaving his strong cup of tea on the dresser, I left the room, taking the breakfast back down with me. "Nicholas! Breakfast!" I called. But there was no answer, which was most unusual, as Nicholas loved a cooked breakfast as much as his father normally did. I went to his room. It was empty. Now what? I thought. I wasn't very hungry, but I forced down some eggs and a piece of toast, leaving the rest of the food in the agar next to the fireplace to help to keep warm. He might get up once he smells the bacon and sausages, I thought. I had washing to do. He'd not have washed any of his clothes. Muttering to myself, I proceeded to empty his clothes into the washing basket. Why did he have to buy that stupid sausage-making machine? Why couldn't they make something more useful, like a machine for washing clothes instead? I announced to no one in particular, talking to myself again. I was pretty busy all day, stocking up on foods now that the whole family were home, catching up on all the gossip from the other wives. The day seemed to be filled with lots to do. It was good, but noisy, to have everyone back. Punchinello had slept the day away, and I'd not seen Nicholas all day, but I baked an egg and bacon pie for our evening meal, just in case anyone decided to join me. I'd been getting more and more anxious about what mood Punchinello would be in, and wondering where Nicholas had got to all day. I told myself to stay calm and positive, but the later it got, the more anxious I became. The sun was starting to set over the rooftops. I'd had one or two of the actors call in to ask to speak to Punchinello, but not a sound from Punchinello himself. Nicholas was the first to show his face. "He's probably too ashamed to face you," suggested Nicholas. Who's ashamed? Punchinella had appeared at the foot of the stairs, silently, unexpectedly. Ah, finally, I said in what I hoped sounded like a cheery voice, trying not to sound sarcastic or annoyed. Are you hungry? Could you manage a little food? I asked nervously, testing out the water, checking what mood everyone was in. Who's ashamed of what? Punchinella repeated, yawning, as he entered the room. No one, said I. Now sit here. I'll have your tea on the table in a moment. I guided Punchinella to the table and placed a drink of fresh lemonade in front of him. There was a knock at the door. Nicholas went to answer. It was Arthur. Nicholas invited him in, but just as he could hear Punchinella's voice, so could we hear him awkwardly decline to enter. I brought that book I told you about, Nicholas. I thought your mother might like to read on that subject we were talking about earlier. Could you give it to her, please? No, I won't come in, he said. Please, could you just give it to her for me? And he left. Who was that? Barked Punchinella, calling at this time of night. It's just a friend, said Nicholas. A friend? You? You have a friend? Yes, he's a writer. You've met him at the salon. His name is Arthur Conan Doyle. He used to be a doctor, remember? A doctor? What are you doing with a doctor? They cost money. How much is he charging you, this friend of yours? Nothing. Nothing at all. Like I said, he's a friend, said Nicholas. Huh, snorted Punchinella. And what's that he's given you? How much does that cost you? He demanded to know. And where's that dinner you promised me, woman? Your dinner is here, Punchinella. Another drink? I asked, getting nervous now, watching the signs between Nicholas and his father, watching carefully, and hoping against hope that the food and drink would be enough to calm things. Punchinella had obviously been hungry enough to keep him busy for a while, but a few mouthfuls later he started asking about the book once again. Give it here, said Punchinella, hand reaching out to grab the book. Nicholas pulled it away from him. The book is for Mother. It's what? He shouted. The book is for Mother, said Nicholas, handing it to me. I sheepishly took the book from Nicholas as Punchinella snatched it from my grasp. Magic, witchcraft, animal magnetism, hypnotism and electrobiology? He read the title out loud. What are you doing with a book on witchcraft, woman? Yelled Punchinella, looking at Nicholas and back at me, confusion and anger on his face. I looked at Nicholas. I hadn't known what it was all about. I could only shake my head and look at Nicholas for an answer. He took the book from his father's hands. He hadn't had time to read the title himself before father snatched it. He read the title first once, then twice before it clicked. Ah, hypnotism. It's what Arthur had been talking about earlier. It's not a book on witchcraft per se. Arthur thought Mother could benefit from being hypnotized and must have thought she would like to read about it first. We haven't even been able to discuss it. I've just got back. Nicholas tried to explain to his father. I'm having none of that witchcraft stuff in my house, do you hear? And threw the book into the fire. Nicholas rushed to try to recover the book. It wasn't his. It had only been loaned to him. His friend had entrusted that book to him. He had to try to stop it burning before it was ruined. His father pushed him as he passed, and already almost pushed him into the fire. Nicholas's hand grabbed the book from the fire, and it landed on and set fire to the hearth rug. I rushed to get a bucket and fill it with water. They fought over the book, Punchinella throwing it into the fire and Nicholas fighting to retrieve it. I started screaming at them both to stop. I tried breaking up the two of them, and Punchinella caught me right smack in the face with his elbow. It was an accident. His elbow hit me as he pulled the book from Nicholas's grasp, but I was knocked to the floor. Punchinella stopped, rushed to my side, full of apologies. Nicholas sat on the floor, wiping blood from his face and trying to dry off the now well-charred, wet remnants of the book. There was an urgent knocking could be heard at the door, and a voice calling Nicholas. It was Arthur's voice. Nicholas managed to get to his feet to unlock the door, and Arthur was shocked at the sight he saw before him. Nicholas with burned hands holding the book that he had left such a short time ago. I sat on the floor holding a kerchief to my bloodied nose, Punchinella trying desperately to placate me with abstract apologies. "Nicholas, pass me those onions, quick, and if there's any water left in that bowl, put your hands in there to draw the heat from the burns. Quickly, quickly!" he shouted, taking the onion from Nicholas and cutting it in half with his pocket knife. "Hold that under your nose and breathe, Judy," he said. "You!" yelled Punchinella, pointing at Arthur. "Get out, witch!" Punchinella struggled to stand, and picking up the poker he yelled angrily at Arthur. "Devil! Witch! Get out of my house now! There is no place for your type of people in my house." He looked round for something more substantial to hit him with. Meanwhile, Arthur, holding an onion to my nose, placed my hand under the onion to hold it in place, and began to stand all the time watching Punchinella and looking to where there was an exit. He grabbed his hat and cane from off the table, looked at Nicholas quickly, telling him to put a poultice of tea extract and honey on the burns to ease the pain, and he'd see him later, bidding myself and Nicholas a good night as he left. Punchinella slammed the door behind Arthur. For a moment I was afraid that Punchinella might have beaten Arthur to death as he had Scaramouche, and it would have all been my fault. Again. Punchinella sat at the table where I was now resting, breathing deeply as instructed. But as the breathing slowed, I began to make a poultice for Nicholas. Punchinella attempted to apologise once again, trying to justify his anger at the intruder, trying, but not succeeding. There was a further knock at the door. Arthur had reported the events to the town beadle, but as it was a domestic dispute, the beadle called the constable to attend to the disturbance. Punchinella was taken away for a few hours to calm down. I tried pleading with the constable to let him go. I tried explaining that Punchinella needed help, not punishment. He was suffering in his mind. I pleaded with Arthur, but he just shook his head. I was anxious for my husband. I loved him. I only wanted him back, the man I'd married, the man I loved. The beadle was the first to speak. "I have no power to do anything for your husband, dear lady. But if he is going to be violent like this, you could leave him. I could find you a place in the workhouse. That is all I can do for you. I'm sorry." "No, sir, he's my husband, and I can't leave him when he is ill." "My hands are tied by the law. I can only remove him from your home, his home, and keep him in prison for the night to calm down and sober up. But that's all I can do for you, I'm afraid. The law is quite explicit. It is only a domestic incident between man and wife. We cannot interfere. The law allows for a husband to have the right to beat his wife if he so wishes, provided the stick is no thicker than his thumb. Nothing more can be done, I'm afraid," said the constable apologetically. I begged them not to take him away. I tried to explain he didn't hit me with a stick. It was an accident. He'd not been drinking today. He's ill, I told them. But no one wanted to know. Not even Nicholas. He was too mad. Punchinella was struggling to get loose from the handcuffs, but the new ratchet-type handcuffs weren't as easy to escape from as others he'd worn. The constable held tightly onto his prisoner as he took him away. "He will be released in the morning at dawn. Good night," he said. The commotion had drawn quite a crowd both outside and in. The whole household had now seen everything first-hand. I tried so much to hide Punchinella's behaviour for years. I was mortified. Everyone dispersed, all except Nicholas, Arthur, the beadle and myself. Arthur had already refused to help Punchinella. I felt betrayed. He tried to advise me to talk to someone. I had spoken to him in confidence. I had asked him for help. He'd refused. "I thank you for your concern, Arthur," I tried, speaking politely. "But this is my problem. He is my husband. He and Nicholas are my family. I will sort this out myself," I told him. I had no one to turn to. I should have known that by now. No one but Nicholas. I had already told Arthur too much. If he was a friend, he would have at least tried to help. To add to my concerns, I now feared for Arthur's safety. Should Punchinella find out that Arthur had spent the evening with us, even though we only talked, neighbours may tell what they saw. A man leaving our home after dark. My thoughts went back to Scaramouche. I wept all night, unsure about tomorrow, unsure about our future. Punchinella was calm when he returned the next morning. Food and drink were all he wanted, and to sleep in his own bed. "With my wife," he added. I knew what he meant. He wanted kissy, only this time I dare not slap his face even in jest. I went with him to do as I was bid. I felt guilty for talking to Arthur about our problems. I loved my husband, but I was actually starting to be afraid of him. Something I'd never thought I would ever feel. Afterwards, Punchinella fell to sleep, but I couldn't. I was restless. My thoughts were all over the place. When I did finally fall asleep, it was from sheer exhaustion. As I opened my eyes the next day, I awoke to find Punchinella watching me. He had not done that for a long time. I remembered our very first morning together, his cheeky smile as he looked upon the face of his new bride. I remembered returning his smile, and the love we both felt at the beginning of our lives together. Our whole future life together. Only this time, instead of his cheeky smile, I saw only pain and worry in his face. His eyes still held a look of what I hoped was love, but they were also filled with anxiety. "I love you," I wanted to say, feeling his pain, but the words, they wouldn't come out. I was angry, too angry to show my husband how much I cared, how much I too hurt. Punchinella's love-making the night before hadn't been gentle. The anger within was coursing through his whole body with an urgency I had never felt before. I wanted my Pulcinella back. I had cried, as his passion ended, for the loss of my kind and gentle Pulcinella. Instead of returning his gaze, I rose up and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry." Punchinella lay with his head beside me, trying to gauge my reaction. I silently stood up, pouring fresh water into the wash basin, and began washing myself before dressing. Breakfast in 30 minutes, I announced as I finished brushing my hair and walked towards the doorway. I looked back at Punchinella. He had laid back down and was staring into the air. He started to move as I neared the doorway. "I'll be down soon," he said simply. The day passed in tense silence. None of us wanted to be the first to speak. Finally it was supper time, and nothing had been discussed all day. We'd all just kept ourselves to ourselves, working on our regular chores. But then Punchinella, not being used to silence for any length of time, decided enough was enough and told Nicholas and I to sit. "We need to talk," he announced. "A total amnesty on whatever is discussed. No one is to lose their temper, and that includes me, I know, but there will be no repercussions. Agreed?" We all nodded. Punchinella started. "To begin with, I would like to say I'm sorry to you both for yesterday," looking from one to the other repeatedly. "I'm worried about money. Our plays just haven't made as much as we usually do, and it's affected us all. We've had to purchase sustenance for ourselves whilst we've been away. Everyone will back me up on that. I haven't been drinking it all away, I promise," he said in defence before anyone could start accusing him of wasting any money. Neither Nicholas nor I made any comment on this statement. "We will be fine," I told him. "Why did you go mad over a simple book is what I want to know," asked Nicholas. "But we don't have much money, Judy. We'd all hoped to earn enough to see us through the winter," he pleaded. "There's no need to worry about money," I repeated. "The book," said Nicholas once again. "No need to worry," Punchinella repeated, sounding irritated by how little concern I seemed to have towards our finances. "No. We don't need to worry because while you've been away, I've been performing with my puppets. I've had quite a few garden parties and my shows have become very popular." I told him, trying to be humble while secretly proud of my achievements. "And people pay you, do they, for your puppet shows?" asked Pulcinella, surprised at what he was being told. "Yes," Nicholas interrupted his father before he could begin belittling his mother's efforts. "Mother keeps herself busy keeping a home running for you while you're away. She keeps herself busy earning money to keep us all afloat because you didn't send anything back to her. What is she supposed to do?" "And what about you?" Punchinella turned on his son. "You do nothing." "Nothing? I've been working with Arthur, learning all I can about medicine. I know it doesn't pay well at the moment. I know Mother helps me as much as she supports you, but I appreciate her, and I aim to work hard to learn my trade so that she may one day be able to just rest. She deserves to be treated like a lady again, maybe even have servants of her own." Punchinella was taken aback. His son had never answered him back before. He was changing. "The book, the one you so keenly threw into the fire, was a book being loaned to me as part of my training with Arthur. It wasn't my book you burned, it was Arthur's. How is he going to trust me with any of his books again? What is your problem? Why, father, why?" Punchinella looked at Nicholas, demanding an explanation. He deserved one, but he seemed transfixed. I could see Punchinella was struggling to answer. "Nicholas, leave it," I implored. "No, Judy. It's time I told you both about the curse." "Curse? We both spoke at the same time. Do you remember the year we went to Romania with Scaramouche? Yes, I replied, Nicholas just nodding. Scaramouche and I were out drinking this one night. I know what you're thinking, there's nothing new there. But this night, we'd all had a good night. Everyone was celebrating. I think you two had left early, but Scaramouche and I were enjoying a laugh together. It was a few months after young John had left for the colonies. Well, this gypsy woman came up to us. I think she just saw us all having a bit of fun and buying drinks and thought she'd try it on with us. Cross my palm with silver, she'd asked. We just thought we'd have a bit of fun, handing her a silver earring from Scaramouche's earlobe. She was not amused and asked again. Cross my palm with silver, I have much to tell you. She tried once again. But we just told her to be off and turned our backs on her. I see darkness in your lives. Great darkness, she said. Your happiness will be short-lived, she pointed to Scaramouche. And you, your happiness will be lost thrice over. She stared into my eyes for what seemed a long time, but was only a matter of moments. That was the night we were caught by the constable who put Scaramouche in the stocks, do you remember? So much for the gypsy's curse, said Scaramouche afterwards. I thought that was a great laugh at the time. I don't see any great darkness, do you? We laughed about it and thought no more about it than not for a long time. Then that night, when I killed him. Punchinella halted speaking as his memories came flooding back. So much has gone wrong since that night. That gypsy. Her curse. Witchcraft. But it's you who always told me not to believe in such rubbish, I reminded him. It's the church. They teach that a curse, witchcraft, is evil. Punchinella now showing fear as he spoke. Your life is what you make of it, Father. Nicholas could see his father was genuinely upset and hoped to talk some sense into him. He had spoken with people who believed in all this witchcrafty stuff. He knew that most of it was hocus pocus. Nicholas tried explaining it to me once. He believed that it was all a matter of intent. A curse was no different to a prayer, a wish, a spell or a chant. But his father and I had started our lives as strict Roman Catholics. And whether we liked it or not, those beliefs stay with you. I tried never to force any one religion on Nicholas. I believed he would find his own path when he was old enough to decide for himself. Maybe that independence of thought means he will be able to help his father after all. Especially now Punchinella was finally opening up to us. Hope was in sight. Punchinella had never revealed the curse made that night to anyone, not even me. At last I could finally understand why his behaviour had changed so dramatically after the death of his friend. But if the curse is to be believed, if the curse is true, there were two more dark things to happen. His fears would only fuel his feelings of anxiety and paranoia. I look at the two of you together today, so close. Nicholas sitting beside you protectively, and I feel I am not part of this family anymore. I want to walk away, for fear that this curse may harm you. He looked at me. He looked at Nicholas, then back again at me. You, Joan, don't need me anymore. You're the breadwinner now. I can't even feed my family. You have Nicholas for company. I am nothing. I am useless. I couldn't even give you the children you always wanted. May God forgive me. I'm of no use to you, either of you. Maybe the only way to keep you both safe is to leave. But leave forever? It would be so lonely without you. I just couldn't bear it. Damn this immortality. Damn it. I looked at the Pulcinella now sat before us, and saw only a lost and broken man. What had I done? I had taken away his manhood. I had made my husband feel worthless. And for what? My own selfish independence.